Okay, today we're going to review factoring. So when you factor, what we're going to be doing is undoing the distributive property that we do to solve polynomials. So let's first review the distributive property. So up at the top here, you'll see three different polynomials or quadratics that we're going to be factoring. But before we do that, I want to go show you something else. So let's say I have x plus 1 and x minus 6, and I want to multiply that. So just remember, when you multiply, it's a distributive property. So the x goes with the x, but it also goes with the negative 6. Don't forget this negatives with the 6. Then we go back and do the same thing with the 1. And those arrows are showing you where to multiply. So we got x times x is x squared. X times negative 6 is negative 6x. 1 times x is simply x. And 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. And then we're going to combine terms. So x squared minus 5x minus 6. Okay? And now that we have those, we've combined like terms, this is what we consider our answer simplified. Okay? And that's where these came from. So the question is, how do you go back to what we started with? And that's what factoring is all about, is going back here. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what we did. So where did this last term come from? Well, it came from these two numbers multiplied together. And where did this middle number come from? Well, it came from these two things added together, which happens to be the 6 and the 1 with the x's on them. Okay, so we're going to look for things that add to this middle term, because that's what we did, and things that multiply to this last term, because that's what we did over here. Okay, so keeping that in mind, let's go back and review factoring. Okay, so we're going to start here. First thing we're going to look for is this 2, and remember, we're looking for numbers that multiply to 2. And fortunately, there's only 1 and 2. Okay, when it's positive, both of these numbers are either going to be positive or they could both be negative. Okay, and we look at the sign right here before the middle term to decide whether or not they're going to be positive or negative. If I'm going to be multiplying to positive 2, they're either both positive or both negative. But if I'm going to add to a positive 3, the negatives aren't going to work. So it has to be 1 and 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick 1 and 2 and make sure that it works out. And 1 plus 2 is indeed 3, so it works out. So then we can write it in our factored form, which is simply, and this only works, by the way, when this is a 1 right here. If it's not a 1, don't use this method. So here's our factored form, x plus 1 and x plus 3, and it's perfectly fine to write it the other way around, x plus 3 and x plus 1, which is why we didn't switch, oh my goodness, not 3, how about 2? X plus 2 and x plus 1. I saw this 3, and it should have been this. 1 and 2. Those are the numbers you put in there. X plus 1 and x plus 2. And we can check it. X times x is x squared. And our middle terms, we're going to have 2x and 1x. And 2x plus 1x is 3x. And 1 times 2 is 2. So you can always check it by multiplying it back out. Okay? You're not always going to have just a single term. You might have others to pick from, but you're looking for the ones that when you add up, you get this middle term. And obviously, these things added up to negative 3, which is why we crossed it out right away. Okay, looking on this case, however, we got more choices here. So the way you get to 8 is either going to be 1 and 8, or 8 and 1, or 2 and 4, or 4 and 2. Okay, now if it's positive, they're all going to be the same sign, or I could have negatives. So we could have negative 1 and negative 8, or we could have negative 2 and negative 4. Okay, if I'm going to be adding to negative 6, I can't add two positives and get negative 6, so it has to be two negatives. Looking right here, if I add these up, I get negative 9, which isn't true. When I add this up, I get negative 7, negative 6, which is what I'm looking for. So I'm looking for negative 6, so here's my two answers. So it's going to be x minus 2 and x minus 4. So x squared minus 6x plus 8 is x minus 2 and x minus 4. Okay, doing one more. This time I'm looking at 6, so I got 1 and 6, or 2 and 3. Now, because it's a negative 6, I need to have a negative somewhere. So I can put them on the first ones, or I can put it on the second numbers. Okay? So one of these is going to have to be added up. The hidden number here before the x is a 1, so I want to know which one adds up to 1. Well, negative 1 and 6 is 5. 3 and a negative 2 is 1. 6 and negative 6 and 1 is negative 5. And this is negative 1. We wanted positive 1, so this is going to be our answer. So we're looking at negative 2 and 3. So we get x minus 2 and x plus 3. Okay, some of you might be wondering what happens if none of these end up working. If none of these end up working, it's most likely because either you have a number here that's not a 1, or your answers are going to be fractions or decimals, in which case then you're going to use the quadratic formula. And that is for another lesson, but if it's not one of these answers, that just means you can't factor into nice integers, and you're going to be grabbing the quadratic formula to solve those. Okay, and one last time, please make sure that there's a 1 before the x squared, or it's left blank. Do not use this method if there's anything but just a 1 right here. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask.